Welcome in, everyone. We have a very fun topic to talk about today, and that is Fort Bragg getting its name back. But there is a big twist that I don't think a lot of people saw coming when Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth made this decision. It's a little bit to unpack. We're going to get into all of it and more. But first, before we do that, as always, please like and subscribe, comment with your thoughts below, and let's just roll into it. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth made it very clear when he became the leader of the Pentagon that one of his goals was to change Fort Bragg, which at the time was called Fort Liberty. The name was changed in 2023 after a lot of racial unrest. They wanted to change fort names, military bases and names, from whatever you want to call it, from Confederate generals to other things. So Fort Bragg, which was named in 1918 after General Braxton Bragg, I got it right in front of me, a Confederate general who, from my understanding, I'm not a Civil War expert, wasn't really all that impressive of a general. They changed it in 2023. Pete Hegseth comes along and says, you know what? We're going to change this back. It's going to go back to being Fort Bragg, but there's a little extra with this one that adds a cool new flavor to it, if you will. But before we get into that, let's roll the tape of Pete Hegseth signing the memorandum, returning Fort Liberty to Fort Bragg. Let's roll the tape right now.
There it is. Pursuant to the authority of the Secretary of Defense, Title 10, United States Code, Section 113, I direct the Army to change the name of Fort Liberty, North Carolina to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. That's right, Bragg is back.
So there you have it. That is a video of Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, declaring that Fort Bragg, the home of Delta Force and many other elite units, which we're also going to get into here shortly, is returning from Fort Liberty back to Fort Bragg. I obviously never served in the military, but even I know the historical nature, the historical importance of Fort Bragg. And I want to read to you now from the memorandum that was signed by Pete Hegseth that says to change the name of Fort Liberty, North Carolina to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in honor of Private First Class Roland L Bragg, who served with great distinction during World War II with the United States Army, and in recognition of the installation's storied history of service to the United States of America. Born in 1923 in Sabattis, if I've mispronounced that, I'm not an expert on Maine, but Sabattis, Maine, Private First Class Bragg entered U.S. Army service and was assigned to the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 17th Airborne Division, and was stationed at Fort Bragg during World War II. Private First Class Bragg fought with distinction in the European Theater of Operations. He received the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry, and the page is a little blocked off. I think I can only read half this word. Intrepidity and the Purple Heart for wounds sustained during the Battle of the Bulge. During these hellish conditions and amidst ferocious fighting, Private First Class Bragg saved a fellow soldier's life by commandeering an enemy ambulance and driving it 20 miles to transport a fellow wounded warrior to an Allied hospital in Belgium. For nearly a century, under the designation of Camp Bragg and subsequently Fort Bragg, tens of thousands of soldiers trained and deployed to crises and conflicts around the world in defense of our nation. Fort Bragg has a long and proud history of equipping, training, and preparing our soldiers to fight and prevail in any operational environment. This directive honors the personal courage and selfless sacrifice of all those who have trained to fight and win our nation's war, including Private First Class Bragg, and is in keeping with the installation's esteemed and storied history. The Secretary of the Army shall take all necessary steps and appropriate actions to implement the decision in accordance with the applicable laws and regulations. The Army shall inform the Undersecretary of Defense for acquisition and sustainment of its plans, including timelines, resource requirements for implementation of this decision, signed by Secretary of Defense. So there you have it. Fort Bragg is now once again Fort Bragg, but instead of being named after General Braxton Bragg, it is now named after a World War II hero, Roland Bragg, who earned the Silver Star during the Battle of the Bulge by commandeering an enemy ambulance to transport a wounded teammate, wounded service member, 20 miles to save that man's life, earn the Purple Heart in that process. So what Pete Hegseth has done here is a very smart move, in my opinion. He has got the name back to where it belongs, Fort Bragg, and he has done it by, instead of a Confederate general, he is now honoring a World War II hero who did something incredible, saved a life, earned the Silver Star, airborne guy, badass dude. I have Roland Bragg's Wikipedia page. We're going to get into all of that. My point from the top of this is it's a historic base. It is home of Delta Force. It is home of many other elite units. And this, to me, is the right call for Pete Hegseth. But I want to hear in the comments from you right now, before we even get to the end, if you support Fort Bragg's name returning to the base in North Carolina. Here's a little more information on Roland Bragg, who is now the namesake of Fort Bragg after Pete Hegseth's change. Enlisted in the Army in 1943 during the Second World War, where he served again in the 17th Airborne Division and Battle of the Bulge. We're talking about the most hellish conditions you could possibly ever be involved in. German artillery, German armor, you're outnumbered, you're surrounded, and the paratroopers, obviously made famous in Band of Brothers for their actions, held the line, refused to break, and then pushed the Germans out. It says, after returning home from military service, Bragg owned and operated a body shop and was the owner of Nobleboro Building Movers for 25 years. In the 1970s, Bragg's company was hired to aid in the historic restoration of Granite Hall Block. After retiring in 1984, he ran a portable sawmill business, passing away at the age of 75 in 1999, where he is buried in Nobleboro, Maine. And I really think this is cool. And for me, as kind of a history buff, the reason I think this is so neat is for generations, men and women trained at Fort Bragg to go do some of the world's most dangerous jobs to protect and defend America, to go out there, punch the enemy in the mouth, and do what had to be done in order to get the job done. Let's read over some of the units that are there. You obviously have 1st Special Forces Command. You have Delta Force that's at Fort Bragg. You have the 82nd Airborne Division, 18th Field Artillery Brigade, 20th Engineer Brigade, 3rd Special Forces Group, 4th Psychological Operations Group, 8th Psychological Operations Group. You have the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, United States Army Special Operations Aviation Command. And this isn't part of it, but this is at Pope Field. At Pope Field, you also have the 24th Special Operations Squadron, which is the STS. It's the Air Force's Tier 1 element that has CCTs, PJs. They embed with SEAL Team 6, Delta Force. And I'm telling you right now, if you don't know about the guys in the 24th STS, you got to go look them up, because they're some of the coolest, most badass guys you will ever read about, ever hear about. The things those CCTs and CCTs and PJs are capable of doing is absolutely nothing short of spectacular. So overall, oh, and how did I even forget this? The United States Special Operations Command, it's one of the most famous bases in the country. And as a history buff, who, again, I never served in the military. I love military history. I love all history in general. We can debate all day about name changes and Confederate generals and all that stuff. But this is the base men bled for. This is where they trained. This is where they spent time with their brothers in arms who paid the ultimate sacrifice, who died in combat. And there was a lot of bitter feelings, I know, from people that were there when the base's name was changed. They weren't happy it was Fort Liberty. They thought it was a joke. They thought it was ridiculous. So what Pete Hegseth has done here is he said, we're bringing the name back. We're bringing Fort Bragg back, but we're going to honor a World War II hero that stole a German ambulance and drove it 20 miles through a war zone to save a teammate's life. And for that, he was awarded the Silver Star. And that's who we're going to choose to honor here. I think that's really cool that the name is back and they did it with a World War II hero. Again, let me know in the comments. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think Fort Liberty is what it should have stayed. I think this is incredibly badass. It's a sign that you can preserve history and you can honor other heroes, such as heroes from World War II. My guess is we're going to see some other bases probably get this same treatment. Again, it's the home of Delta Force. I love talking about Delta Force. I love talking about special operations overall. I give this an A-plus move to Pete Hegseth. Just really well done. Way to kind of mend the bridge. Way to prove, hey, we can preserve historic names and do it by honoring other people. Just all around, great job. But I want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. Do you support Fort Bragg's name changing back from Fort Liberty? Should it have stayed Fort Liberty? Put it in the comments. Let's get a good debate going. Let's see what everyone's thinking. And make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, I'll catch y'all next time.